But the kind of agenda for today, excuse me, is talk briefly about the PoNS treatment, and then have a user story from Carly about her experience with it, and then a user story from Jens about his experience as a patient with Parkinson's, or a person with Parkinson's, as we like to say. And then we'll get to meet Kurt, the engineer, and then we'll have a Q&A session after that. And we ask that through the session, just raise your hand. There's a little raise your hand button, and as you see on Zoom, if you have a question, or post it into the chat, and then we'll try to get to your questions as soon as we can in between the sessions or whenever it makes sense. Of course, we'll have a little break in between each chapter here to talk if you have questions and discussion, but we'll leave most of it for the end when we have Q&A and deep dive and have a nice discussion and have a lot of fun. So with that, I think if I haven't forgotten anything, let's go ahead and get started. I'll turn it over to, I believe, Carly, right?
Yes. All right. So first, we're just going to give a quick overview of what's been going on with the PoNS treatment today, because this book was written 2014, I think. And a lot has gone on since Norman Deutsch originally reported on the treatment. So this is just a quick video from the manufacturer of the device. Let's just watch this.
The controller goes around the neck. The mouthpiece rests on the front of the tongue with the electrodes facing the tongue. When the device is on, the electrodes send mild electrical impulses to the tongue. These impulses stimulate the cranial nerves that have direct connections into the brain through the brainstem. This sets off a cascade of activity in the brain, which is affected by targeted training. Balance training is part of PoNS treatment and is done using the PoNS device with the help of a PoNS treatment specialist. Gait training is also used for PoNS treatment and is done with the guidance of a PoNS treatment specialist. When the stimulation is combined with physical activity, changes occur in the neural network. Training helps to strengthen the pathways and facilitates the recovery of function, which may result in improvement in balance and gait. With improved motor control and stability, you can enjoy a more active life with a reduced risk of falls.
So that's the very commercial overview that they just have on like YouTube. But I'll tell you a little bit about like the treatment. The PoNS device is not really meant to be just used by anyone. It's all part of a program, which is the baseline is a 14-week program, but this is customized for every patient. Oh, Kevin, did you have something? You just raised your hand.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot, as I tend to do with Parkinson's, forget things and have brain fog once in a while. I wanted to mention some of the disclosures we had there, just that, this conversation should not be taken as medical advice, and we're not doctors. We'd like to be someday, maybe, but this conversation is not sponsored or supported by Helios Medical Technologies, nor any other technology company. And then we're kind of hosting this book club basically because we want to engage with the neurotech community and the patient community and any other communities that care and want to make life better for us all. And I think that was it. So I just wanted to squeeze that in before you get going. But yeah, Carly, go ahead. Looking forward to your story.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that back up.
Sure.
So, oh no, we don't want to watch this again. Okay. So the treatment is 14 weeks, though this is customized for every patient, just based on like their own response to the device and the stimulation. But generally how it goes is you would do 2 days of stimulation in a row and then a day of rest. And what do the days of stimulation look like? You would have one or more 20-minute stimulation sessions while you're doing therapy. So that's like alongside balance, gait, or cognitive exercises that you would probably do with like an occupational therapist or a physical therapist or a kinesiologist. And then one thing that's pretty interesting is that they actually found that the treatment works best if paired with a 20-minute deep breathing meditation at the end of the day while doing the stimulation. So this is what the device looks like right now. And I'll give a brief history of the device in the last decade or so. In 2014, a company called Helios Medical Technologies took over the device from the folks at University of Wisconsin-Madison. In 2018, Health Canada approved marketing authorization for mild and moderate traumatic brain injury, TBI. And this was all for balancing gait deficits. Then in 2020, Health Canada approved marketing authorization for multiple sclerosis, also balancing gait deficit. In 2021, the FDA approved it for multiple sclerosis in the United States. And it took a while for it to get to patients, but this year they announced that they had their first patients actually use the device in the States. And there are a few other developments going on currently. Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration gave marketing authorization in Australia, though it hasn't been super defined at this point. There's also a breakthrough device designation going on by the FDA for treating stroke in the United States. And there's also a study going on in British Columbia in Canada to study it for Parkinson's disease. And we'll go into this more at the end in case you're interested. Before I move on, are there any questions so far about what is the device? What does it do? What's going on today?
I just want to ask a little bit, because you've laid it out, and this slide really lays it well here. You can use the device for MS or mild traumatic brain injury in Canada, and in the US, it's gotten the first step, but it's not available commercially. Is that correct?
What do you mean by available commercially?
It's something that you would not be able to like go to a medical provider and order one. Can they use it with you in a clinic?
They have like successfully, legally administered the treatment in US clinics.
Okay.
They're kind of just starting the rollout from my understanding.
Yeah.
My own neurologists haven't really mentioned that they've like heard about the device yet. Though Helios has announced that like real US patients have received the treatment.
Got it. Okay. Someone's asking what it costs as well too. Does anyone have an idea what the price is, or is this something that a clinician would purchase and you would use it in your clinician with them, and you wouldn't buy this at home on your own, or?
You have to get it through a clinic, correct? Yeah. And you're not just given the device and told to just have fun. You have to do it like with a treatment, with the therapy. And I mean, I can't claim to know exactly how it's been working in the US, but I'll go into this in a moment, how I've used the therapy.
Very good. And to the person who's asking about what it costs and whatever, that's very common when you do neurological electrical stimulation, like you would use for like with a physiotherapist. You wouldn't normally buy that yourself. You would go to a clinic and work with a clinician using the device under supervision. And so that's it. I'm going to stop here and let you roll with it. I just wanted to add that in.
All right. So if it hasn't been revealed yet, I am going to tell my story of how I've actually used the PoNS device for rehabilitation from a traumatic brain injury that I had 3.5 years ago. My name is Carly. So in 2019, I was a senior in college. It was about 2 weeks before my graduation ceremony. I was graduating from the business school at Penn, and was all set up to go to start working at a software startup. And 2 weeks before the graduation, I was hit by a car. The report, I guess, says that I was found 30 feet from the car that hit me. And that day they performed a hemicraniectomy surgery. They took off this half of my skull to alleviate intracranial pressure, just to protect my brain from secondary brain injury. I was in the neuro ICU for about 40 days, I believe. I don't remember very much of that time. And then I did inpatient rehab, like getting help, relearning how to shower and swallow, just like kind of like be a person. I mostly had lesions to my frontal, parietal, and occipital lobes on the right side of my brain. This picture here really clearly demonstrates what it's like to not have that portion of your skull on. As it turns out, it's just gonna like sag in. So I thought this good picture to show, just was pretty severe. After I was discharged from the hospital, I went to do outpatient rehab. I was doing physical therapy to help with my balance, motor deficits, vision, and left-sided weakness. I also had occupational therapy, working on personal hygiene again. And then more advanced, I got into cooking, going to the store to buy something, and organizing like a calendar or a to-do list. In speech and language therapy, I was working on reading, penmanship, writing, and conversing, talking. In November, I actually was discharged from rehab for plateauing. My clinicians kind of came to my family and I, and they said, hey, we are not seeing improvements from Carly. And, like legally, ethically, we can't bill your insurance without seeing improvements, which at the time felt like a life sentence to disability. Like, sorry, you can't be helped. And I was always a very ambitious person. I was working in startups, working in New York, San Francisco. Like, this was the most devastating thing to me because, everyone around me was kind of like, well, Carly, like, you might need to like reimagine what you think your life is going to be like. Like, it was so devastating, and I didn't feel like myself. I didn't feel like a person really, because I was just really struggling with fatigue and like, very low cognitive abilities, especially. And so in January of 2020, about 9 months after the accident, my family and I decided to go to Canada to get this treatment, the PoNS treatment. This is something that my hometown physician had been urging us to try since my accident. But at the time we were like, okay, so this thing was just approved in Canada, but it's not approved by the FDA. Like this, we thought it just seemed kind of like out there. But, when I was discharged, we kind of felt like, well, I guess we'll try this, So I went there, and I hadn't really struggled with balance and gait that much at that point anymore. And I really wanted to improve my cognition, especially my executive functioning. And so the clinicians there were like, well, we don't technically have a program for this, but you can do like an off-label use and do this brain training game called Brain HQ. And it was just memory games, visual processing, auditory like input, just a computer game that I could play while doing the stimulation. These are my goals that I wanted to accomplish with the treatment. And after I did 4 weeks of this, it wasn't actually like in the book where people said like, oh, instantly like things started working. I think I was a little bit too disabled and my brain was really, really unhealthy and noisy. So we were 4 weeks in, I was exhausted from the treatment and I wasn't seeing the effects. So I pulled out of the treatment after 4 weeks. And after resting for a few days, kind of all of a sudden, I just had like energy. Things felt smoother. And for the first time since before my accident, I was able to be busy all day. Even if that was just like doing laundry, calling my grandma, cooking for myself. Like the main thing that the PoNS did for me that first treatment was it removed the baseline super high level of fatigue that I was dealing with. Like the fatigue was, I've described it as every day felt like you took the ACT, you ran a marathon, you were really hungover, and you were broken up with. Just like, oh my God, so exhausting all the time. And then after this, I could just like do stuff. I was just like a person again. So I actually started working part-time at the company that I was supposed to join before the accident. I worked part-time for a year. And I also did the PoNS treatment again. In January 2021, I did the stimulation while working at my job as a product analyst. And then I took 1 month off to rest in February. And this was also like, the treatment is really hard for me, at least. So I need some time to reap the benefits of the stimulation and like be reminded like why I'm doing this. And so after a month of rest, I did one final month, same thing, PoNS treatment while working. And I started working full-time right after I finished the March session and worked full-time for a year. And I guess like I was very focused on getting back to like the life that I was gonna live, which is like working at a tech company, doing product management. I even moved to New York, which was like always a dream of mine. But I don't know, I think I've just struggled to like forget or just after like everything I've been through, and especially like the recovery that I've gotten like from the PoNS device and other therapies, I'm like, oh my God, like I can't not work on this. So I'm actually going back to school to study neurobiology at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, which is where the PoNS device was actually developed. And I met Kurt Kaczmarek a few months ago just to talk about this. So that's kind of my story about the PoNS and how it's helped me after TBI. But does anyone have a question or something they want to bring up before we move on? All right. Next, Jens, we would love to hear about your use of the PoNS.
Thank you, John, for inviting me to this meeting here. I live in Berlin. I'm diagnosed with Parkinson's I received about 10 years ago. So I'm quite well into this insidious disease. And John was one of the first persons I contacted because of some speech problems. And I had heard of some novel and ideas he had, and so I reached out to him, and we did some training via Skype or something. Thank you very much for that, John.
You came under my radar with the PoNS, reaching out to me when I was working for the Davis Finney Foundation. It's the first time I'd heard of it, but the book had just come out, I believe. So you're kind of bleeding edge, willing to try stuff. I think that you're always looking, Jens. That's what I like about it.
Yes, that's true. By that time, when I was diagnosed, the first thing I did was I stopped working. I decided that I'm an entrepreneur and I have many companies, and I decided not to be in active management anymore, but to kind of dedicate my life to finding a cure for this disease, and finding applications, interventions, physical interventions, exercise, nutrition, whatever it may be, that help, that either stop or slow down the progression of the disease, whatever. Can you still hear me?
You are spotlit now, so it is you.
Okay.
But we could actually take the slides away if you just want to go full screen. I was actually hoping maybe you might even talk a little bit about your foundation at some point too. But maybe Carly, you want to hit the screen share for a second, and then we'll come back to it. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, okay, very good. Oh, this looks a bit chaotic in my room. Sorry. Anyway, I decided to kind of dedicate my life to find a cure or something, anything that helps. And I developed many exercise apps, and we did all kinds of things. I found a foundation, and we're doing lots of things. This is not the topic for today. The topic of today is the PoNS. I have it here. It's still kind of a part of my Parkinson's past. I have it here. And I have a little clip for you, by which you can see what I did in Moscow. I learned it in Moscow by Yuri Danilov, who was kind of the inventor, at least to my knowledge, of this.
He was part of the team with Kurt, I imagine. You had your own device. You got it from Yuri.
I didn't. I got it from someone else.
Okay, very good.
May I share my screen?
Yes, let me say, I thought I already said you as co-host. Is it not? Have you sat there? Hold on.
Let me see.
My apologies.
Not yet.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not as fast as I should be. Here we go. Go for it. Sorry.
I know. Let me see what it is. Yes. Can you see a black screen right now? See a black screen? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, you're good.
Moscow. Synchronizing stride length. What you can see here now is that the distance between the feet is on the right side significantly smaller than the left side. And that is the beginning of all nightmare walking gait disturbances you can imagine. And I trained in Moscow 2 weeks long, and then after that 6 months, and you can see here that the stride length is exactly the same. Absolutely identical. It's not the length is important. It's the identity between left and right. That's what's important. When I walk faster, then of course the stride length is also long. You see me apart. This was quite strange to do this kinds of training in a fitness club. I had to find one that has a treadmill that goes with only 0.4 kilometers per hour. It's very slow, and you almost lose balance because it's so slow. And next to me, these guys are running like hell, and you sit there and stand on this with this thing in your mouth and walk slow distance and do what we did is we trained kind of new kind of patterns for walking. I learned walking from scratch zero, that it begins in the hips and that it is a turning and the shoulder goes back and all these kinds of things. And that we trained really very extensively, much more than I heard here in the introduction, every day 12 hours. And so I did it really very intensively, and always with the PoNS. And when it was empty, I did reload and continue then. And I also did all kinds of speech and language training with the PoNS, like putting it on your mouth and singing songs and summing and all of those things. It was very helpful. I think the PoNS was really the one device in combination with the tough neuro trainer I had in Moscow that really taught me that my brain can do something beyond my imagination, that there's more in the world than I can imagine. And I think in the beginning we had only a very low energy on this PoNS, so it was only a little bit tickly on the tongue. Later we increased to maximum, and it felt great because it thought more energy is more energy for your brain. And I know now that two of the main nerves go through the tongue directly to the stem brain, and from there it kind of stimulates the whole brain, and this sets you into a state of advanced learning. And this is what I felt there in Moscow, that I really am a different state. And there's a hand raising it. It means that I should stop here.
Jens, I just wanted to know if you're still doing stimulation today or recently.
No, because this machine has to be updated every whatever month, and over time I lost control over the update software. But I can call in Moscow anytime. I recently called the neurologist in Moscow, and he said to me, I can get the new software anytime. So this is also a nice opportunity to use it again. I didn't use for a while now, and I want to use it again. I think it's just this. It's good to know that it stimulates your brain, and I think it's also for the vagus nerve. It's helpful. So I believe in it, and by that time I was searching the web for where I could get this, and everybody said you can't get it because it's not FDA approved. So forget it. But I continued, and I searched all the dark rooms, if you may say so. And one day, all of a sudden, out of the blue, I received a WhatsApp or a news SMS or something. I don't know how the hell you need my number. And it was only written call, and then the name of a Moscow Russian name, and this number. Just this, no sender, no nothing, not call name, and I called there, and it was a neurologist who just was in the process of setting up the first neurologist clinic for private patients and experimenting with the PoNS. And I told him it's not approved and stuff. He only laughed at it. Okay, doesn't matter, it's approved or not. No, don't worry. I just went to the Moscow embassy, got my visa, and today when I prepared for this meeting, I found this book here again, Norman Deutsch book, and in it, my visa from Moscow. Quite nice, and I was the first patient ever who used it, and in a training, and of course I was very eager and ambitious and concentrated, and so I made huge progress in this time, and this I think also was quite a nice experience for Yuri Danilov especially. I talked with him 3-4 times during this week when I was in Moscow, and Yuri was from the Russian Academy of Science, which was collapsed after the Glasnost and then the disruption of the Soviet Union, and the Moscow scientific institutions were world class, and these scientists were welcome everywhere. So Yuri went to medicine, and he took over the bureau of this guy who almost got the Nobel Prize for tactile communication. The guys who were the inventor of tactile communication, they made blind people kind of see, again, through applying all kind of stimulation on your skin. And these guys developed the PoNS. So it's really a smart group who did this. And so I hope that it will help other people, and I hope that I will do it again soon. And I'm open for any questions. Thank you very much.
Rui?
Yeah, I'm kind of overwhelmed with questions, but I'm try to be synthetic. So, how do you feel? Why this is not used more around the world? I mean, I understood that the FDA had still some issues with that, and we were able to access in Russia. how big was the market of this in Russia? So in Russia, was it really had a big impact?
At that time, no. At that time, I was the guy I called and who treated me was the very first who received it. He was a friend of Yuri Danilov, and so he kind of under the counter received these boxes, and so he just had some PoNS and just use it. And I think exactly the way it should be everywhere, because we as patients should have the right to use and train and try out whatever we want. We're standing with our backs against the wall, and I can't really hate it that in Germany, for instance, we are not legally. I'm not allowed to use diabetes medication. Why is that? It makes absolutely no sense. So when we find out the repurposing, the repurposing market is a huge market. The Cure Parkinson Trust UK is only focusing on repurposing because it gets much quicker. Many people are strongly believe that all substances for all diseases are already on the market. They only have to find the right pathway and the right application. So there are many medications on the market at the moment that we could use, but which I have to take illegally. For me, it's no problem because I have connections and everything, and money I can get everything. But ordinary people, they don't even dare. They think they are criminal if they do it because against the law. I don't care about this, but others do. And so progress is really artificially undermined. And that is the main problem in this whole industry, the health market, so-called health market. It is a market that it has a tremendously amount of time. They have time forever because they are not there for any of their career. They're there to continue their career. I'm in many study groups over the past 10 years I've been, and one group, for instance, is testing all kinds of devices at the moment on how they can measure the symptoms of Parkinson's. I myself founded MedEngine is the company that has now brought out a device, a watch like that, to measure all kinds of physical symptoms. And I'm in part of the group where there are 26 industrial companies and 26 scientific institutions. And they are supposed to test for every symptom if possible to find a device by which you can measure if it is getting better or not. Sleeping and depression and everything. They have 5 years for this. And I asked the chief of the group, Walter Metzler from Kiel, I know personally, Walter, why are we taking 5 weeks? In 5 years, it's all past again. It's passato. He says, I never thought about this. I asked him, can we do it longer? Jens, all grants are given for 5 years. In Europe, all grants are given for 5 years. Always. We have to finance doctorate institute and staff and stuff, and this takes time. So the mantra and the absolutely mantra of the science is good science needs much time, and so it takes 5 years, and so it goes with everything. So I believe, allow me please this last word, the only chance we have if we want to really come to find a cure for Parkinson's is by the patients actively being involved. We are the only ones who know the disease. Whenever I speak to a neurologist, I sense that he knows nothing about this disease. I have studied it over the past 8 years, and I experienced it since almost 10 years. So my knowledge of the disease is way superior to any neurologist. And if we could combine this knowledge, if all of us patients would gather their data together, structured and goal-oriented, then we as a group would know more than any pharma company, any insurance company, any institution. And then we would choose which scientists pick up and who will get involved into science. But I'm maximum frustrated over the past 2 years because I experienced so much apathy and disinterest and just depression and everything among the patients. You know, when I see a post on Facebook in one of these dozens groups, which some of them are amazingly good. For instance, the Parkinson Research Group, led by Julian Lowe and Karen Raphael, it's an excellent group, full of experts. But in the normal groups, when you post some joke or something, there's 100 reactions. And when you post a serious question about something interesting, it's almost no reaction. People are, they're just, but enough. Okay, go ahead.
I see John's got his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in a little bit. I think what Cure Parkinson's Trust has been doing in what we call repositioning or repurposing medications has paid off already and is really leading the way in many ways because, as you alluded to it, Jens, that the medications are already on the market. So they've undergone FDA approval. The safety part of the studies, the very early studies have been done already. So it would be nice if we could find a regulatory mechanism to say, hey, we know this is safe. We have long-term data, especially some of those diabetes medications that are being repositioned. And I would urge anyone who hasn't checked out The Science of Parkinson's with Simon Stott, who is now their kind of research administrator. He gives great lectures on the topic. And I always want to point out that sometimes medications can have some negative impacts. And I point back to the nilotinib study that was done at Georgetown. That's actually a cancer drug. And so you have to be a little bit cautious about dosages and timing for that. So there is some caution, but I do think, especially the diabetes drug that you're talking about, Jens, I think they see a lot of potential for it. And I'm glad that you have the connections, but that's exactly who you are, Jens. When you reached out to me like 6 years ago, it's like, I have a way of getting to this. And it's like, of course you do. I wanted to say one other thing about the grant cycle, only because I'm biased. I'm on the scientific advisory board for the Davis Finney Foundation. If you got anybody who's looking for a smaller grant, quick and dirty, they'll open up sometime in early next year, and the application to getting funding is like 6 or 8 months, and it's $100,000, and they will let people from Germany and other countries. Actually, they funded one from the Netherlands recently, but that's just a personal bias.
Thanks for that.
It's not going to be a huge grant like you get from like a European institution or an NIH thing, but $100,000 to try out an idea, it's pretty good.
It's a significant sum, definitely. Having or not having.
Maybe Jens, your advocacy is well noted, and again, just for people who like what he's saying, I know there's a lot of advocates that feel exactly the same way. You should check out his foundation in Germany, the Uvedo Foundation. Maybe you can put the address in the chat. Because I know you do a lot of advocacy. I saw you did a ping pong thing recently, which is taking over the planet. We had it here in Cascais and near Lisbon.
Yes.
So, and then Kevin, I'm gonna mute myself. Kevin, why don't you go ahead and jump in?
Oh, thank you, Jens, and thank you, Carly, too. Both of you, your stories just really inspire me. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah. So as I was saying, I just think the fact that, neither of you gave up and just said, whatever they say, the doctors say this or that, and I'm just going to go sit on my couch and feel sorry for myself. It's inspiring. And I think having your family support and friends support is very important. But just, the technology is one thing, that it's your willpower that helps. That's all I wanted to say.
The willpower?
Yeah.
Your willpower to just, overcome and keep looking for solutions and trying solutions. I think so important for us as patients to remember that and just
You're right. But you know what?
We have to go to Moscow, or we have to go to Canada, that's what we got to do sometimes. But
I went to China and everywhere. But the truth is, what John Perlman, you all know him, wrote in his book. He wrote, one day he knows disease will prevail over his willpower. And so we don't have endless time to apply power. This disease is really bringing you out over the years. So we have to come to terms.
Yeah. Maybe in that vein too, I want to make sure, now we've talked about the experience of people with lived experience, but we we're really lucky that Carly happened to know Kurt, and I want to hear kind of directly from the person that was there at the ground floor and the process of what made you see this and made you turn it into something there. So I'm going to mute again, but Kurt, I don't have a good introduction for you, but you are the founding engineer. You're part of that. You mentioned Yuri Jens, but I think Kurt was also part of that team. Could you maybe give a little background and go from there?
Sure. So this is my my 20-minute spiel, I assume, or
yes, go right ahead, please.
yeah. Okay. I just want to make sure it's my turn to go here, or if this was just a little side thing. So, yeah. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, and I'm glad you introduced me as an engineer, because I'm an engineer and biomedical scientist. I made a big point with Carly that I'm not a physician. I don't dispense treatment advice. I can't get you a PoNS. I don't have any special ties with Helios or anything like that. I was part of the team at the University of Wisconsin in Madison called the Tactile Communication and Neurorehabilitation Lab. It's quite a mouthful, TCNL. And I just reread Norman Doidge's chapter. Yes, the lab was called that when he wrote the book. So that's good. At least that's some consistency. And so yeah, I mean, standing on the shoulders of giants. Paul Baccarita, who was one of my mentors in graduate school as a graduate student at UW-Madison in the late 1980s, studying electrical and biomedical engineering. Paul was one of my mentors, and I became very interested in the field of sensory substitution, in particular tactile sensory substitution, where a person who is blind can, basically, strap a camera on their forehead or hold it in their hand and sweep it about and receive little tingling sensations or vibrating sensations somewhere on their body. Okay. And with sufficient practice, a person doing this, they can develop, vision. I mean, some people put the vision in quotation marks. Paul never put it in quotation marks because, it wasn't as good as real vision, but they were able to do true visual things, identify positions of objects, navigate in space, identify, common objects, people, so long as it was a fairly simple, high contrast environment. And there's kind of the limitation. So the technology and the understanding, the processing just never really advanced to the point where somebody, I think, can safely cross a street with a vision substitution system. But they can gain a general appreciation for the world around them. And, Paul did this in 1969, for heaven's sake. So this is a half a century ago. It's been brought up to date several times. My working with Paul as a graduate student was, in some sense, bringing his early work back up to date, and we played with a number of things. This is from a company this is not one of my inventions, but it's a company that I worked with, Madison, Wisconsin. It goes on the abdomen, and it's 384 little electrodes that give you, comfortable tingles in the pattern of what the camera sees in front of you. Well, this was $45,000, so they didn't sell very many of them, as you can imagine. And it's basically a consulting company now. I think they might have sold 3 or 4 more now. Basically a research tool. But that's the kind of stuff I worked on with Paul early on. And then he asked me the question of, okay, I'm going to try to progress from this towards PoNS. Okay, that's my goal. And so Paul asked, kind of near the close of my graduate studies in 1991, he said, well, do this on the abdomen, can you do it on the fingers? I said, well, I don't know. I've never worked on the fingers. My graduate studies had to do with electrical stimulation of touch. How can we, produce touch sensations somewhere on the body that feel like pressure or vibration without it hurting, right? I mean, it usually hurts. If you do it right and you do it really carefully, you can make it so it's a comfortable, controllable sensation. Although it's almost more art, still more art than science. So the science is kind of catching up with the art. At least it was when I retired, and now the next generation is kind of taking over that effort. But I told Paul, yeah, I think I can do this. And, and based on 2 pages in a lab notebook, we wrote a grant application to the National Institute of Health because I couldn't find a job. So I figured, well, I may as well try to create one. Paul was principal investigator on that, and we got funded, amazingly enough. It was a lot easier then, about 5 times easier than it is now, if not more so, to get NIH funding. And our goal was to create a fingertip tactile display. And this is, one of the results of that, and a larger version, kind of a few fingers version. In the end goal was to produce a device so this was, kind of when personal computers were starting to become popular, right? This is the mid 1990s. People who were blind had very little access to computers. They had screen readers, right, and still have screen readers, and that's even built into operating systems now, thanks to some of the work that went on at the Trace Center at the University of Wisconsin. A lot of this universal access stuff came out of the University of Wisconsin. That's my pride of the institution. I had nothing to do with that effort, though. But so this was part of an effort to bring the graphical information on a computer, so pictorial information that cannot be converted into text. How can the person who is blind access that information? And so the traditional way of doing that was by a printer that prints raised lines on a piece of paper, okay? And that's fine if the information doesn't change. Well, I mean, everything changes on a computer. So I could talk another hour just on this project, but so we got to the point where somebody moving their fingers over this could identify simple geometric figures like circles, squares, triangles. They could even identify the correlation coefficient of scatter plots. Okay, what one might reasonably call a visual task, albeit not a very difficult visual task. Okay. So we got it to that point, a couple cycles of grant funding. Technology never got good enough to move it to the commercial sector. My basic research in comfortable electrical stimulation did not advance to the point where we could really take this to the next level. So this, we published a few nice papers, and then it kind of, okay. Waiting, for the next younger investigator to work on. And then, as that project was drawing to a close, Paul Bakurita, who knows a lot about the brain, obviously, he's a professor of rehabilitation medicine and a neuroscientist. In fact, he was hired in to the university as the chair of rehab medicine and shook things up there more than a little bit, to the point where after 5 years, he wasn't chair anymore. But he said, okay, maybe the fingertips isn't so good. Well, the tongue has a lot of brain that's devoted to processing information, right? Not just taste, but touch, the sense of touch on the tongue and in the mouth in general, but particularly the front of the tongue, is as good at, or if not better than, the fingertips. So he said, can we do vision substitution on the tongue? Seriously? Okay, I understand your reasoning, but who's going to put this thing in their mouth? So, but Paul prevailed on me, and so we used this earlier device as being more suitable, and we went up to the lab and started. That's seriously how it started, and lo and behold, the sensation was more comfortable than it was on the fingertips, and we had about a half a dozen, naive individuals who tested perception of geometric figures on the tongue using this, doing just that. And yes, this really is held together by duct tape. And they were able to do it as well on the tongue. So we said, okay, this is interesting. We told the university this was an invention. The university took assignment of the invention, patented it, and we worked on 2 applications, one of which was, and so let's try to keep moving the needle towards PoNS here. 2 applications, one of which was vision substitution. So, you know, you got a webcam type camera strapped to your forehead, and then this thing that goes in your mouth that gives you these little tingles. And that device actually became approved in the US by WeCobb Incorporated, a Madison or Middleton, Wisconsin company, approved in the US as well as in Canada. And I don't know how many they sold. Maybe they sold a couple hundred of them or something, but the company never really, you know, made it financially. But they did get to the engineering of putting a commercial approved product on the market, which is wonderful. The other thing they did was, and this is where, you know, my colleagues, Mitch Tyler, you know, so Mitch worked with me on this stuff. And Mitch had an inner ear infection, lost his sense of balance temporarily. And so Mitch is a biomedical engineer, just like I'm a biomedical engineer. And he said, well, you know, your inner ear has a balance sensor in it. It's sensing, you know, kind of roll, pitch, and yaw, and sends that, you know, and then sends that to the vestibular nucleus in your brain. Okay, so we're biomedical engineers. Mitch said, well, you know, you can buy a device that senses position for a few dollars, right? You know, and it's built in your cell phone now. You know, can we use this to provide sensor substitution to individuals with balance disorders? You know, Mitch had recovered his balance. But a lot of people that have inner ear infections or antibiotic reactions or various kinds of trauma, you know, to the vestibular apparatus in their inner ear, you know, they never get their balance back, and they're lived life disabled because they basically don't know which way is up. Their world is constantly swimming around them. You know, a lot of these things happen in TBIs as well. And so, you know, we tried this out, and we created this system that measured a person's head tilt. And this is where, you know, Yuri Danilov kind of came into the stream as well. So I'd worked with Mitch for a number of years, and then Yuri kind of hung around the lab, and he knew Paul, and he said, well, you know, I know a lot about the tongue because he studied the tongue for many you in Russia. And so we added him to the team. And, you know, he also had a great deal of knowledge of, you know, he's not a physical therapist, but he's probably the best therapist on the planet, you know, for his knowledge of the neurological mechanisms involved in therapy. And so, you know, Mitch and Paul and Yuri put together this program, you know, and this rehabilitation program, you know, and you know, and I put together some of the hardware for creating this device that'll put a spot on the tongue that moves around depending on which way your head is tilting. Okay, so we tried this on an individual, Cheryl Schultz, who I still stay in touch with. She lives in Madison. And she actually recently published a book about her story, but she was our first test subject with balance substitution. And so she had an antibiotic reaction to gentamicin and lost her balance. She came into the lab. Somehow she found Paul. Paul brought her into the lab, and she put this device on, and she was fairly quickly able to get her sense of balance while using the device. And this is an individual that, you know, like many people with vestibular disorder, there she is. You know, close your eyes, you know, you'll fall right out of your chair because you don't know which way is up. Your body has no innate sense of that. Okay, yeah, that's the book. I'm still waiting for her to give me a signed copy of it. Love Cheryl, love her to death. And what the really amazing part is, and this is kind of the next segue, is that, after she used the device for, a couple minutes, she had maybe a minute of balance after she stopped using the device. Use it for 20 minutes and she might have a few minutes of balance. Use the things for 20 minutes a day over a period of time, over a period of days, weeks, months. And somehow her brain is figuring out how to reuse any residual sensation that she has in her vestibular apparatus. And your entire body is full of sensors, position sensors, force sensors, shear sensors, muscle torque, joint torque sensors, and all kinds of stuff that tells your brain where you are in space. And unless you have a balance problem, you don't even realize all this is going on, right? Well, anyway, so we found with Cheryl and with other individuals that had balance disorders, primarily peripheral balance disorders, that after they use this device, they would have some good period of time of better function, sometimes almost normal function, until they needed to use it again. So we figure, okay, well, it's not just that we're providing information to the user, we are providing some way of training the brain and perhaps even stimulating the brain towards recovery. So the obvious question was, do you need the sensory substitution at all? In other words, we need to sense head position and give that to the tongue, or can we just stimulate the tongue while people do carefully crafted balanced exercises? And so the answer turned out to be yes. And we started out with this kind of really rough looking instrumentation. I mean, this was the first tongue, this and these were the first way we stimulated on the tongue. Okay. After we put this thing aside, and then there was another version called the tongue display unit. And I led the design of that as well. So this is what Cheryl actually used, and this was what we did the early vision substitution studies on as well. These things go in the mouth like that. Well, nobody can take this home and do their therapy at home. We never thought they would need to, because we'd never conceived of neurorehabilitation when we designed this stuff. This was for sensory substitution. So, had a little side project here. Okay, so I left out part of the story. So we brought in a few people and tried just whole tongue stimulation while they did balance exercises. And depending upon the condition they had, they recovered some of their neural function, right? And it was the same kind of plan where they would use it for 20 minutes, couple times a day with physical exercises, balance exercises, movement controlled exercises, all designed primarily by Yuri and Mitch towards a maximal challenge. So you need to maximally challenge your brain, and that's why the recovery is so hard. And you're all reading Norman Doidge's book, and the point of the book is you put focused attention on a task, preferably with some kind of strong emotional component and commitment, and you release neurotransmitters that aid in neuroplasticity. So the brain does all this stuff itself. We're just kind of helping it along with the neural stimulation. So anyway, we demonstrated that, using this big clunky thing stimulating the whole tongue, people are gaining function. And we did this with people that had traumatic brain injuries and multiple sclerosis, peripheral balance disorders. a stroke, and then also we did a little work with people with Parkinson's disease. And we saw some improvements in all those conditions, and I think Norman Deutsch does a great job of explaining in his chapter some of the mechanisms involved there, and the concept of that we're probably doing something to increase the brain's homeostasis and ability to regulate its own function. We just got to give it a little kickstart so that it can do better what it's already capable of doing. And if it's been damaged by some disease or trauma, to just help it to kind of get back to where it should be. Of course, assuming there isn't too much tissue that's been damaged, or in the case of Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis, tissue that continues to be damaged. Anyway, that's a bit of a diversion. So the question came in, well, people need to take this thing home with them. We had no money to do this. There was no funding, so of course we had to do a bootleg project. As all good things start out as a bootleg project. So this is actually the very first PoNS device, and it really did have a 9-volt battery hanging from it like that. But it kind of worked to demonstrate the concept.
May I say something?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you. This what I find really interesting. What you said is that Norman explains very well how it works. No, he doesn't explain that. The Norman Deutsch chapter 7 does not explain how it works. We don't know how it works. Nobody knows. We know way too little about the brain and about why what works, because we all expect too much in a short period of time and too little over a long period of time. Mm-hmm. We all don't have the patience to follow a certain path for long enough. Maybe if we took fish oil, tons of it, it would help our Parkinson's. And nobody takes tons of it, milligrams. So we don't know the right dosage. And also with the PoNS, we don't know how long should we use it. We don't know that. We can only experiment it. And then from the experiments, we can derive kind of theories, what pathway and might have triggered. So that, in my eyes, is the main problem for all these applications and for everything in the brain and Parkinson's science, everything, everywhere, that we just don't know enough. And the reason why we don't know enough, because we don't have enough data. It's still a scandal that in Germany, for instance, all university clinics, 35, excellently staffed, don't exchange their data. They don't know how the one treats the patients with Parkinson's like this and other like that, and they don't exchange the data. My dentist sends the picture of my tooth since 20 years to the States, and it is in an exchange group. So they find the best way of treating this kind of whatever I have in my teeth. The neurologists still don't exchange anything. So I just want to say that if we could find a way that how it has to be applied. In the beginning, I don't know who it was. Someone said you have a system now for the PoNS, how many weeks it has to be applied and stuff. This is all made up. Nobody knows. How can anybody know? What would happen if I stick this thing in my mouth for 20 hours in a row? Nobody knows. No one will ever do it. But maybe.
Okay, you've got a really good point. We're at we're kind of at the beginning of understanding. I think there may be a little more known as far as the development of the therapy, than perhaps has been published, than perhaps has been transmitted to Helios Medical Technologies. So, and I've seen this, more than once in my tenure as an investigator, of as things progress from the laboratory, to the marketplace through, what we all know is the valley of death, right? There tend to be a great deal of simplifications made along the way. And, the discussions we had at the University of Wisconsin were, concerning these questions of, how long, how often, how intense, what frequencies, what pulse sequences, what kind of patterns, on the tongue, or to do different patterns, different frequencies specifically target
Yes.
different, tremor versus bradykinesia,
Yes.
versus this versus, it's wide open to study. And I don't want to give the impression, and I apologize if I have, I don't want to give the impression that the research is done. No, the research has just begun. I absolutely agree with you on that point. At the same time, Helios Medical, or any company, they need to, kind of get on a pathway towards generating revenue to fund the next generation of research. And, they're kind of stuck in that right now. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. Absolutely. I totally agree with you.
And one way to support and speed up things, accelerate the research path, would be to connect the patients. We don't know who is using it, but if we knew, if you would ask anyone who ever used it, if he would be willing to open up his email address to the others, then we could form a group, and this group could bring up new knowledge that would be very interesting for your scientists, To close the loop between practice and experience of patients and the knowledge of scientists, this I think is mandatory. So please, if you are the right address to ask this for, I'm asking for, please make sure that as patients now in the Parkinson field are connected with each other and have the chance to build a group. And so we will also let you into our experience. This will help everyone. Thank you.
Kurt, I can see Rui also has his hand up.
Yeah. I wanted to get in there and I get to the next part of it. Rui, what were you going to bring up?
Yeah, I agree with Jen. There's a part of it. We really need clinical trials and several steps, and that needs grants and stuff like that. It's always a big deal to have something that is new. The pioneering stuff is always complex, and it's sometimes hard to understand why there's not so much funding, or there's some interest in one technology or another. My question is here: you're talking about the tongue. Did you have any tests or did any tests with the tongue? And for example, light simultaneously? Do you had one or more than one solution that you introduce because if it is only one, it could have some impact. But if you have more than one technology in the treatment, light technology or others, did you address any of that of this situation? I don't know if you understand the question.
So at the University of Wisconsin. No, we did not explore light stimulation. We've been using electrical stimulation. The advantage of which is it activates pretty much everything under the surface of the tongue. The disadvantage, of course, is that can be more difficult to control, and that's an area that still needs research. Certainly, is to understand the stimulation of the different fibers and what might be the most effective for any particular kind of rehabilitation or enhancing rehabilitation.
So it's just a shock, or is it light? What is it? Well, you only use one type of input.
Yeah, it's electrical pulses on any given electrode on the PoNS device. So I've got various versions here. This is the Helios version.
Yes, but
so on any given so it's got 143 electrodes. If you look at any one of those, it's pulsing about 150 times a second. Okay, and then
so
all
my question
140.
is, you just use the pulses. You didn't use light or other type of.
It's purely electrical.
Okay.
Purely electrical. Nothing vibrates. There's no light. There's no heat. There's no other kinds of. There's nothing chemical in there, except for any electrochemical reactions that might transpire.
Taking it back to the book a little bit, Rui, the goal is that you're using the tongue as a way of getting to the cranial nerves. And so the light might be another modality, whatever, but as they're hitting kind of one topic here, which is they can get to the trigeminal nerve, some motor and sensory, and then the facial nerve, motor parts of that. And I think that's why they're focusing on the electricity. I do have a question though for you, Dr. Kurt. I'm sorry, I won't do that to you again. Is that if you have this ability now with the device to maybe change the patterning, is that like what kind of new innovations now that you have this device? Are you able to, can you try different patterning? Can you try different ways research wise, or are you trying to just lock in a good treatment regimen and see if you can get outcomes?
Well, so, the answer to your question is yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, we found something that seems to work fairly well. And, as I mentioned, on a commercial pathway, once you have something that works fairly well, you try to push that as far as you can, right? Instead of spending the enormous amount of money required to, study all these patterns. That being said, and this is a point that Yuri would talk about for hours probably if he were on this call. There's a great deal of literature on electrical stimulation of the brain and neurorehabilitation, particularly in the domain of transcranial direct current and deep brain stimulation and similar kinds of technologies. And there have been parametric studies that show that certain frequencies, certain patterns are more effective than others for certain conditions. And yes, all this deserves to be studied on the tongue as well. We took a reasonable, educated guess on something that might work. And, unfortunately, at the university, we didn't have the resources to explore behind that. And we have the equipment to do it. But, to be able to run, even a clinical trial studying three different frequencies was really outside the resources that we had, at the time. So that's really, I'm retired now. So yes, that's something that absolutely needs to be looked at.
You're speaking.
Maybe it'll yield great fruit. Maybe we've already hit the sweet spot. I mean, nobody really knows.
You're taking a very practical stance on something that I think we should recognize too, because starting companies is very hard, and getting them to a point where you get past the initial kickstart funding from the NIH to something that's commercial. So that's something to be respected, is that, hey, you have to get to a point where you can be self-sustaining, or you attract a whole bunch of investors and get to the next level of self-sustaining. It's not doable. It's not like you have unlimited resources, and I think that's something to be fair about. I mean, to respect that you had to start where you started. You had a great idea, and now you're trying to get it to a point where it can be self-sustaining enough to maybe you'll get to another part of this, but maybe not.
Right.
Does that come out of you saying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure, because we're going to run out of time. I know you're doing a study on Parkinson's that Carly mentioned, and not that this is one thing about Parkython. We started it. I'm a nerd, and I had some friends with Parkinson's and we're nerdy, but I love that we're kind of moving to other neurological disorders and injuries and insults. And so I do want to make sure I hit the Parkinson side of it. That's my background and area, but I love that we have other voices here. So there's a study I think that Carly's going to talk about that's coming up in Vancouver, British Columbia, correct? I'm speaking to you, Michelle. I read your text, your chat. Carly, maybe you're muted or not.
Yeah, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, this is a study that's going on related to the clinic I went to in Surrey, British Columbia, which is like a suburb outside of Vancouver. They're doing just like an investigation on the PoNS device with Parkinson's disease. So I highly recommend anyone that's interested in trying the PoNS apply to be in this study. And we'll follow up over email with this information as well.
Now that it has the breakthrough device designation in the FDA, I mean, you're going to have to go another step to get to to an actual FDA approval. But I mean, are there mechanisms for anyone to be able to make use of this study-wise with a clinician? I mean, what's the pathway for someone in the United States maybe who wanted to try to make use of this device? And Michelle, I anticipated your question. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Or if not, maybe that's where the advocacy should be heading.
You can definitely go to Canada to get it. You just have to pay out of pocket. Even in the US, I think you might need to pay out of pocket just because it's such early days and insurance like doesn't even know what this is. I would imagine, and I don't know, but you can go to a lot of different clinics in Vancouver, or sorry, in Canada, and get like off-label use of it for Parkinson's, stroke.
Carly's. I think Carly's information is correct. I'm not aware of anything beyond that, although I'm not currently in close touch with Helios, but that's consistent with my understanding.
Okay, I just think that, again, what I'm hearing, and Carly, you did it kind of in an intermittent way that didn't follow the protocol, but maybe that's because you needed some time for consolidation because you had more severe damage. And Jens, it sounds like you need a software update to Windows 11 or whatever. I'm getting a little bit. But you did have benefit from it. I think that
absolutely, and I saw other people having benefits too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think it's worth finding ways to explore it if people could find a way to do it. Obviously, our same disclaimer, talk about it with your doctor, even with anything. Jens, what you were saying before with fish oil, high levels of fish oil can actually thin your blood. So talk with your doctor before you go into the great blue yonder, but I think it's worth looking at.
Don't drink a gallon all at once anyway.
I won't.
Except for Bushmills, the Irish whiskey, you can do as much of that as you want. Okay. Sorry, Mark.
Is there anyone else from the audience that wants to ask a question to anyone or bring up anything?
No.
So I have a question. Can you go to Canada or somewhere if you have an off-label use and it's not any of the things you've listed, but it is like a rare disease that's neurological?
I think maybe, yeah. Like I honestly don't know exactly how it's going to work. If you have you do need like a diagnosis, a prescription.
A prescription for the PoNS? I was just a diagnosis of a disease.
Diagnosis, yeah. I really recommend, and they don't know that I'm doing this, but I really, really recommend the clinic that I go to in Surrey, British Columbia.
That might be a good place to start to try to, Susan, just to see if you can find somebody who could guide you through whether an off-label use would be appropriate for your diagnosis, and you don't feel like you need to disclose to us. But I'm saying if you have something that's a little off the beaten path, you could probably reach out to someone and say, I'm dealing with this diagnosis or these issues. Because I don't quite know how they get around it, but off-label is quite frequently implemented, not just for technology, but also for medications. Yeah, maybe when we, Michelle, when we send out the video link, we can maybe put a couple other links. I want to definitely put out a link to the Uvedo Foundation, Jens's group. He's a really strong advocate, and we'll maybe include a link here as well to Helios, who I want to remind us is not a sponsor, nor are they affiliated with this. We had two people who used it and liked their tools, and that became enough of a reason to have a conversation about how it was talked about in the book, and then it was just kind of how we got here, guys. So yes, it'll be available when we send out the follow-up email with a link to the video.
Well, I guess I can tell you the disease. I'm sure you heard of it. It's Huntington's disease.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's in the family of movement disorders for sure. So
yes.
Seems like if you got to a neurologist up there, they could probably find someone who would be versed enough to tell you, to guide you a little bit, right? Again, I think this is one of these things where, as Kurt had mentioned, I mean, they started from a place of dealing with blindness using this electrical stimulation to something that maybe is neuroplastic, or at least providing benefits that outlast the actual on time of the device, which, you know, is kind of different than we would say for DBS, where when you turn the stimulation off in a deep brain stimulation device, it doesn't provide its benefits. So that's a different take on it, to now trying to find a way to see if they can help beyond MS and TBI, maybe into Parkinson's, perhaps. I don't know that you've had any research I've seen on Huntington's. That's why you want to try to find a doctor to help guide you through that, and maybe talk to your doctor too.
I wonder if Kurt, have you guys heard of use of the PoNS for Huntington's?
I personally have not.
Okay.
It doesn't mean it hasn't happened.
I think that's a safe for the lawyer's answer. Yes, very good. Yes.
No, I mean, honestly,
Yep.
if I had heard anything, I would be free to say it. I mean, there's nobody telling me not to say anything, so I'm okay. You know, the only thing I really, the only thing I really couldn't do is, like, promote the device for something that's not approved. I mean, and so that's been discussed as off-label uses.
Yeah.
No, I'm not aware of it being used for Huntington's. I'm not saying it wouldn't work. Somebody in Russia might have tried. No, I don't know.
Okay, I think that's fair. We just want to make sure everyone has a chance to have the conversation or ask the questions. But I think, again, we can probably follow up with the video and then some of the relevant links. And I would just recommend anybody to make sure that they have a conversation with their healthcare providers. I would say that probably someone who's had deep brain stimulation, I don't think your doctor is going to be very psyched about you putting an electrical device nearby. But again, have a conversation with your doctor about that. That's a shame, but people who've undergone DBS often get eliminated from a lot of studies, and it's not fair. It is, they end up not being able to participate in certain research. Kevin, I see you have your hand up. What do you want to fill in on something here?
Oh yeah, I know we're winding down on the time here. I think we could do a whole nother chapter or an hour or two on just the topic you brought up, Kurt, about the crossing the valley of death, or the chasm, as they call it, to commercialization. And I think also, Jens, you mentioned, both of you, data, the importance of data and experimenting, and I think kind of connecting all the data together and so forth. So I think that's another bigger question. I don't have to answer it now, but to think about, because I think, for example, just how do you measure your success? Obviously, you both had great results, Jens and Carly, but how do you able to measure that and turn it back to science and say, here's what we did, here's how
Absolutely.
my movement changed over time, or my speech went from here to here, and if it's UPDRS or some other kind of method of using having some standards or something, but just something to think about. I don't know if you have any basic thoughts or something you want to talk about, but
That's where the real bucks are, is trying to standardize, and yeah.
And get to some other diseases. Yeah, I used to like patients like me. I kind of wish something like that was a little more open. I think once they got bought, it got changed a little bit. But there's got to be a way for people to share this. Maybe that's a Uvedo question. Anyways, guys, I'm looking at this slide here. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have another conversation talking about chapter 4 of the book, where they start talking about use of light and some foreshadowing from Rui. There's been some very interesting work in Parkinson's and some other diseases. So consider joining us in a couple of weeks for that on the 29th. In the meantime, again, we're not going to do a whole lot of editing. We're going to cut out the beginning and the end, the noise, and set this up on YouTube so people can check it out. And hopefully, look for an answer for yourself. I think that's the one takeaway I take from both stories, is people who were told, hey, this is it, this is all you can do, and they're like, no, I think I can decide for myself where I can stop. And I love those kind of stories, so maybe you can get some inspiration and try to find a path for yourself.
Thanks a lot.
Have a great time. Have a great couple of weeks. We look forward to seeing some of you next time. And Jens, again, I really appreciate it. I know it's late over there. I know you're a passionate advocate, so I had a feeling I can get you looped in. I appreciate you came. Kurt, it's amazing to be able to talk with the actual founder and talk about the nuts and bolts of not just where you started with your research. And then Carly, you're really the reason behind why we did this today. It was your passion and your enthusiasm for this. And this is before we knew your story, so that's even more inspirational. So have a good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Everyone,
Thank
thanks
you.
for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.